This is Fleetwood Joe's Sicilian pizza. And out of all the styles of pizzas that exist, I have a particular love for this one. Growing up in Westchester, we had some of the best pizzerias you could imagine. And in particular in Westchester, this is famous. So in this video, I'm gonna show you the easiest way to make this Sicilian pizza. And I'm also gonna explain why Dave Portnoy botched the pizza review to one of my favorite pizzerias. Oh my God. But first, to get a dough this supple, soft, and beautiful, we gotta start a 3-day process of making dough. So to get our first dough, our pre-fermented dough, our poolish started, we need a scale and to warm up some water to around 80 to 90 degrees and add about 250 grams to the bowl. Next up, we're gonna take some bread flour. We're gonna measure 250 grams of that as well. Equal amounts of water to flour. And then we're gonna add in 1 gram of instant or fast-acting yeast. And then just use a spatula, stir that together until you form like a wet mass. Think about a pizza dough that looks way too wet to use your hands to work with, and that's what you're going for. We're just gonna scrape off the sides, bunch it all together at the bottom of the bowl, and then cover it, and we're gonna let that sit at room temperature. You could also leave this out overnight, or you could put it into the fridge, and I do a combination of both. Once it's doubled in size, then I place it in the fridge overnight to slow the fermentation down. All right, so today is the start of day 2. Our starter has been fermenting for about 24 hours, a little bit outside the fridge and a little bit inside. We get this nice, jiggly, beautiful starter dough. You might call it a first dough or a pre-fermented dough. And now we're making the second dough, which is where we take this starter or poolish and we combine it with more flour, more water, more salt to make the eventual dough will turn into Sicilian pizza. So again, we need our scale, and I got a big bowl here. We're gonna do most of my work. So we've got 500 grams of poolish, or the starter. That's got bread flour in it. We're gonna take 500 grams of all-purpose flour, add that to the bowl. Again, we need some water, and you don't want cold water, so I'm just gonna zap it in the microwave real quick. Warm it up to around 80, 90 degrees. Next, I'm gonna add additional 250 grams of water, and then we're gonna throw in 6 grams of salt, and we need some olive oil in here, but we're gonna work that in during this next step. I'm gonna give that a little stir, get that flour starting to hydrate in that water. Now, obviously that's not enough, we gotta get our poolish in. Now, once we get our poolish in the bowl, we kind of have to work those two doughs and force them into one homogeneous mix. So I'm gonna start with my spatula, just try and get some of the shaggy bits worked into the poolish and hydrate them. Then I'm gonna take my fist and I'm gonna try and just knead the dough. The fist allows it so I don't get too much dough stuck to my fingertips, just until a rough, shaggy dough forms and there's no visible dry flour at the bottom of the bowl. So now we got a shaggy ball formed. Basically, we did a little kneading, but this is essentially pretty much a no-knead dough in the traditional sense of kneading. So what we're gonna do is wrap this up, gonna keep it out here, room temperature, and a lot of that work we would do if we just started kneading this for the next 20 minutes is gonna begin to happen at a slower pace as it rests. We're gonna give this 30 minutes on the table, and then we're gonna come back and I'm gonna show you what we're gonna do next. So now it's been about 30 minutes. We gotta put olive oil into this dough. When you're mixing it in then, I need a little bit on my hands, so I'm just gonna be a little generous with it. What I wanna do is grab this dough, and then I just wanna kind of stretch it, just sort of work it and see how it comes like a little smoother. It's kind of now becoming a dough. Kind of just wanna stretch it, pull the sides and press in, and we're basically just gonna begin a process of stretching and folding the dough in the bowl, letting it rest for 30 minutes. It's going to rise, smooth out, and as we stretch and fold in these 30-minute increments, it'll begin to look more like a finished dough over time, and it'll get less sticky. Semi-kneading it a few times, letting it rest, repeating that process. 30 minutes later, now that first kind of manipulating of the dough, I'm gonna call that setting up the dough. We rested it for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna go ahead and start the first of at least 3 sessions of stretching and folding. Cover it again, 30 more minutes. So now we're going for our third stretch and fold. Again, we're gonna oil our hands, pick up one side, stretch it, fold it onto itself, rotate and repeat just like before. And now it's been resting for an hour and a half total, and you can see it's just transformed without even having to touch it much. Then we can get it covered again. 30 more minutes. It's now been resting for a total of 2 hours. with 1 initial manipulation, 2 stretch and fold periods. And this is what we sort of got. Now it looks much more like pizza dough. This time what I want to do, since it's nice and airy and fluffy, then oil my hands. And this time I'm going to sort of dig my hands underneath and then just lift and let gravity sort of do its thing. And rotate it and do the same. And then just kind of do that a few times. It just sort of stretches that top of the dough, gets it a little bit smoother, and then you can almost start to work it back into a ball. So to create tension on the surface and seal the bottom. Now that dough's looking nice. Smooth top, needs some more time, and what we're gonna do is cover it. We're gonna put it back in the refrigerator, and all this time, yesterday, today, the time it's gonna spend in the refrigerator until tomorrow is all the active fermentation. It's the difference between dough that is sort of just bland, akin to something a frozen pizza might be, and a dough that has flavor. Something you would want in a pizza, a focaccia. All of that is fermentation. So now this goes into the fridge, which is gonna slow the fermentation and the rising. That slowing down is where the flavor develops. Tomorrow what we want to do is get that out at least 4 hours before you want to eat it. Because we're going to need to run another process of letting that dough proof and stretching it in the pan. But that happens tomorrow on day 3. Now we begin day 3. And as you see, this is in the fridge overnight. It's just become beautiful, airy, supple dough. For a Sicilian, the more air that's in the dough, the less big of a dough ball you need. And I want to bake it in this pan. It's a 10 by 14. You can use a large sheet tray, and this ball of dough will be big enough to kind of make the full sheet tray. But this might be a little big for this. So we're just gonna get it out and weigh it. If it's too big, I might give it a little bit of a trim. I'm just gonna get the ball out and see what it weighs. 42 ounces. I need about 36 ounces. So I'm just gonna kind of tighten it back up. Now we need a healthy amount of olive oil. More than you'd think, because we want that bottom to get nice golden brown and crispy. And so now what we want to do is just sort of press it down, right? A little bit. We're not trying to get it to its final shape. Literally going to just start the stretching process and then let it rise in the pan. Now, just like we kind of did yesterday, we stretched and folded, and then we let it rest, let it rise. We're gonna do that again. I wanna let this kind of come down to room temperature. I just took it out the fridge. I wanna let it relax. I wanna kind of stretch it out to fit the pan. Let it rise one more time before we bake it. That gives us time to prep the sauce and everything. And just let that chill in a warm place. So that enters its final stage of proofing. Let me explain to you quickly why Dave Portnoy got a pizza review wrong. On his Westchester tour of pizzerias, he stopped at Fleetwood Joe's. As you know, a spot I grew up on eating. Sticking to his one bite review,
one bite everybody knows rules.
He takes the Sicilian pizza, the star of the show, and throws it on the floor. He proceeds to then try their regular New York slice, reviews it highly.
That crunch was spectacular.
And then gives it a low score of 8.1.
I go 8.1.
That's like a B- C+ to me. Then he picks up the Sicilian, the thing he should have been judging all along, says it's good.
Very good.
And scores it even lower than the New York slice that he thought was a good slice.
I like the normal more. I'll go 7.9 here. 7.9.
Now, I respect Barstool and Dave, but his pizza reviews are some of the most arbitrary things I've ever seen in my life. For context, he gave Joe's Pizza, the famous Joe's in New York City, the most basic bitch slice in the city, an 8.5, and there are 1,000 pizzerias in and around New York City that are better than Joe's. All that to say, if I did not know Fleetwood Joe's and their amazing Sicilian pizza and just viewed Dave's review of it, I would not go and try this. Today, we're throwing some respect on the Fleetwood Joe's Sicilian. Now, for our sauce. We're starting with our favorite whole peeled tomatoes, some Bianco di Napoli tomatoes. And in case you didn't know, different pizzas kind of have different sauces. For example, a margarita, New York slice might have a fresh, raw sauce. Simple. Something like this, a grandma pie, a Sicilian pie, usually has a cooked sauce involved. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my whole peeled tomatoes. Because I wanna kinda have a nice thick sauce, I'm just gonna puree. I'm gonna pull out and puree the actual tomatoes and keep the puree that they're sitting in the can. In that puree, there's like a lot of water. So by just cooking and using the whole peeled tomatoes, we're just gonna get a better, more concentrated tomato flavor. And just run them through the food mill. It's gonna puree them. It's gonna remove the seeds and the skins. I'm just gonna get a nice, sweet, beautiful tomato. I actually know the owner to Bianco di Napoli. I'm gonna actually try and get on the farm for the harvest this year. Maybe make a little content. Got every last bit of that good stuff on the bottom, and then all the skins and seeds remain up top. Longtime viewers will know about a food mill, but if you don't have one, basically require equipment here at Not Another Cooking Show. So I've got my saucier on the stove. I'm gonna get it preheated on medium-high heat, and I'm gonna coat the bottom of the pan with olive oil. As that olive oil heats up, because I'm feeling lazy, I'm just gonna do the grandma method for slicing garlic with a little paring knife in my hand straight into the pan. Once we've got our garlic sliced, I'm gonna throw in some basil, season with a little bit of salt. We're just looking to give a little bit of color to the garlic, develop a little complexity in it. Once it starts to brown, I'm gonna turn the heat off, and then in one stroke, pour all that tomato in there. Otherwise, it's gonna spit at you as it reacts with the oil. Season with a little bit of salt, bring it up to a boil, and then we're just gonna let it simmer and reduce and thicken slightly. So now it's been resting. Now we're just gonna try and get it to fit in the pan. You kind of do also wanna create a little bit of an edge using the sides of your hands. I'm just gonna cover again, let it continue to relax. Another 30 minutes, all I'm gonna do is just try and get these corners of the dough touching the pan. Now it's basically ready to go. I'm just gonna cover it, get my oven preheated. So our oven's just about preheated and our dough is nice and proofed. That crease just traps that air in there, which creates that kind of lift in the crust. Now here's the thing. A lot of people just par bake this as is. Because it's a thick dough, it gives it more time before you add the toppings. When you do that, you might get the dough to dome up a little bit in the center, when I want the crust to kind of be the thing that domes up. So I'm gonna do a bit of a hybrid. I'm gonna hold off on the cheese, but I'm gonna sauce it and par bake it before adding the cheese. Just gonna add some of the sauce, not too much, not too little. Probably more than a thin pie I would, but I don't wanna go crazy. And the sauce is gonna sort of prevent the center of the dough, the main event of the pizza, from bubbling up in the center too much. Then just a little Italian seasoning on top. Something also I wouldn't really do on a regular New York pie. This is about when you call up your guy at Fleetwood Joe's and he goes, yeah, give me about 20 minutes, pal. Pop it in the oven. We're gonna let it bake for 7 minutes, then add the cheese. So we're gonna let that cook and par bake for about 10 to 15 minutes. Halfway through, give it a rotate. And to be honest, I put it in before the oven was fully preheated, so I'm not getting like the color development I really wanted to get around the edges, so I'm just gonna brush a little bit of it with oil and try and get a little bit of browning occurring. Sometimes in a shoot, I lose patience. What can I say? You can still see the preheat light on in the back. Once it becomes nice and golden, we can pull it out of the oven and begin layering the cheese. Now it's nicely par baked, we can add our cheese. Just got these slices. You can get your guy at the deli counter to do this for you. Just gonna split the rest in half and line it up along the side. Then we can just go ahead and pop that back in the oven, ideally when it's preheated, and we're just gonna cook it until that cheese is beautifully melted. There's slight char, little browning. When that cheese is beautiful and gooey, it's time to pull it out. Get it out of the sheet tray and just allow it to cool down for a minute. All those fermentation bubbles are the result of that time we let it have to rise, all that yeast to kind of eat up those sugars and fart out that flavor into the dough. That's what we're looking for. Now to slice it, we go down the middle first, splitting it in 2 sections. And you can just see how soft it is when you cut through it. Then we're gonna cut each of those halves into 2 pieces as well, and then you're gonna get 4 strips, which we can then cut down the middle, and we end up with about 8 pieces. And despite Dave Portnoy giving it a mediocre review, where I grew up, people love it, and you might too. I grew up a Pizza Hut kid. This is a much closer version of a Pizza Hut pizza than a New York style pizza is. And Dave, it's worth a little goddamn respect to put on this, you know? Recipe to this is gonna be down in the description. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.